Good afternoon. Welcome to APPA's weekly webinar series. My name is Billy Zydick, Standards and Codes Administrator for APPA. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. The webinar recording will be posted on the APPA webpage later this afternoon. You will receive a follow-up email tomorrow with a link to the webpage where all webinar recordings are housed, as well as a link to our upcoming webinars. We have webinars planned out through April 2020 and are open for registration. All attendees are in listen-only mode. Please type your questions in the chat box and they will be answered in the order they are received during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. If we run out of time and we still have questions, responses will be sent directly to the person asking the question by one of the presenters. AIA and professional continuing education credits are being offered. Please send me an email at Billie, B-I-L-L-I-E, @appa.org to request a certificate if you did not indicate you wanted one when you registered. Also, if you have more than one person attending the session from a central location, please contact me so everyone gets credit for attending. At this time, it is my pleasure to turn this over to Ted Widener and Tom Becker. Take it away, gentlemen.
Good afternoon. This is Tom Becker. I'm the AVP for Facilities at Thomas Jefferson University in Philadelphia, which recently merged with Philadelphia University. In my role today, I'm acting as the editor for the trilogy of these books. This is the maintenance book of the trilogy. There's also grounds and custodial, and I'm going to be assisting Ted on some of the presentation.
And I am Ted Widener, Associate Professor of Engineering Practice at Purdue University. And after 30 years in facilities operations and maintenance, I have the pleasure of working on projects like this and of teaching young engineers about facilities. We're going to start today with Tom describing an overview of the operational guidelines trilogy where he is the primary editor.
Okay, so in the operational guidelines, the books are laid out very similar. So all of them have a table with 5 levels of service, and sometimes in the books they're actually named different things, but for the purpose of today, in the maintenance guideline, it goes from where you're in crisis all the way up to show place facility. Most of us operate somewhere in the middle, like managed care or comprehensive stewardship. Maybe a few of us have slipped into reactive maintenance, but that's what that's about with 5 levels of service, and we'll go over that in some detail. Sustainability is come to the forefront and is an integral part of our building objectives, and that's part of the attributes that you look at in the 5 levels of service. We've integrated GPS, GIS, and CMMS in this edition, in the last edition, and in this edition that we're writing. So right now, we're under the publication is the 2nd edition of this manual, but we're in the midst of writing the 3rd edition, and we're interested in some of your comments. We did a survey which Ted will go into, but this is sort of a preview of how that book is evolving, and it's in the final stages of being written right now. We're continuing to improve and provide benchmarking recommendations, introducing the methods to develop our own standards, and there's a lot of latitude in this. Much of what we recommend talks about benchmarking within yourselves so that you can see your progress or hopefully not diminish concerns, and coordinate common administrative and staff recommendations, so that these books are all written so that you can turn it over to your boss and he's going to understand it. It's not intended to be a highly technical manual. It's meant to be something you can sit down and read in a couple of nights and have a good understanding and go away with a good understanding. So, Ted, are you flipping?
Yeah.
Okay.
So one of the things that we are spending a fair amount of time looking at are linking the guidelines with APPA's facility performance indicators. We're going to provide some links to APPA's new total cost of ownership standards, which will be coming out shortly. We'll also be looking at an area where I've been spending a fair amount of time, and that is new best practices. We have a separate author talking about reliability, and I'll be presenting materials on the ISO Facilities Management Suite of Standards that's looking at different standards on making your facility operation as good as it can be. We'll try to incorporate more case studies so you can see how your institution can utilize the guidelines. One of the things that we want to make sure everyone knows about is that there was some terrific contributions from APPA's editorial staff, Steve Glazner and Anita Dosick, who helped us with the survey. So let me go on and talk a little bit about the new manual. You see the old manual or the current manual displayed on the screen. Our contributors include Matt Adams from FM Squared, Tom Becker, Bob Beckstrom from University of Nebraska-Lincoln, Melissa Bergeron from UMass Amherst, Tom Coombs, Bob Fleming, Jim Jackson, Eric Ness returns now from Bloomsburg University, Kimberly Pachuta, Rick Pretzman, Ed Sampe, and we still have material that Phil Ware provided for us from RS Means, which we will be updating. Everyone behind the scenes at APPA has been very helpful in helping us get the book as far as it has gotten to date. So last year, APPA conducted a survey of its members that looked at all parts of the operational guidelines and asked members to comment on a number of different factors. While the guidelines aren't used by everyone, 71% of the respondents replied to the survey with things like that they use the technical information in the guidelines, the calculations, staffing estimates, and so on. And a large portion also use the narrative information, which describes different parts of maintenance, whether it's custodial maintenance, building maintenance, or grounds maintenance. And they use the materials to determine either staffing or service levels or both. Some of the comments that we got that we are trying to respond to in the updated edition is the use of APPA audits to take advantage of the guidelines and maybe even to participate in APPA's Facility Management Excellence Program. They're using them to explain materials and information to the staff about what their working expectations are. They use the guidelines for workload estimates and for labor planning, which is very important to control your costs. It's used to explain what's going on with facilities to the administration, so the administration understands why you either need a lot of people or why budget cuts are going to reduce service levels. And it helps everyone speak with the same language. Some of the requests that we got for the next edition include the creation of models for baselines and metrics so that people can track their own improvements. They're looking for utilization or production rates or time standards for work that's done on campus. This is particularly true for campuses that are small and have difficulty understanding some of the large square footage information that many state or public institutions have. They'd like to see more quick reference tables and charts have some discussion or narrative on the value versus cost issues. Obviously, they're looking for new industry trends, and they want to see an example of a maintenance management plan, which is something that really looks at the strategy of your organization and the institution that you're serving and how you intend to address some of those issues. But we still have the continuing challenge that the only constant is change. And many of us are seeing shrinking enrollments. We're seeing changes in technology. We're seeing more and more remote sensing or data devices that we need to take advantage of. We're competing on an international level, and so we need to look at international standards for facility delivery. We have to pay attention to the environment and sustainability. We're dealing with constant demands and higher expectations from faculty, staff, and students, and yet our budgets and our resources are getting constrained further and further. So our overall concept with this new edition is to provide not just the how-to, but also link together with APPA's new online terms and definitions materials so that you can look at standard terms and definitions and be comfortable with them, and they're readily accessible to everyone to understand. We're going to provide paths for continuous improvement, representing that facility or recognizing that facility services can be delivered in multiple methods and that we don't have to do something the same way at every institution. And in addition, we've been challenging our original authors to update the materials, recognizing their continuing expertise in this area. And the good news is that everyone who is contributing are experienced professionals. They know what they're doing. They have a focus on providing powerful content and creating improved guidelines. One of the things that's happening in this edition, and Tom mentioned it briefly, and we'll talk about it in detail in the next slide, is that we've updated our maintenance level chart to recognize different standards or expectations now with sustainability and compliance. And Tom will show you how to plot where your institution stands and how to track the direction that you're headed.
So what you're looking at on the screen right now is a template and a matrix of service levels and attributes that make up those service levels. So the goal here essentially is to quantify subjectivity. A number of these attributes, have data that goes behind them, but in other cases, it's more of a descriptor of where your institution stands. So when you go down the attributes, you have a service response time, your customer satisfaction, preventive maintenance versus corrective maintenance. So basically how much of the time you're spending preventing problems versus reacting to them. Your maintenance mix, whether you're regulatory compliant, and there's various levels to that. Aesthetics, interior, exterior, and lighting, service efficiency, building systems reliability, how often do you break down, sustainability, and then the facility maintenance operating budget versus the percent of the current replacement value. That's what CRV stands for. And the campus average facility condition index. The facility condition index basically is how much of your campus is broken or beyond its useful life. When you go across the top, the acronyms that we use are, for one, is a show place facility. So the next one is comprehensive stewardship. Managed care is in the middle. Reactive management is fourth, and you're in crisis by the time you get to 5. So about almost 10 years ago, Lander and I did a presentation to Nakubo at their national conference, and it was a pretty packed room. And we asked the business officers, after going down and describing, managed care, how many of them felt that their institution should be operating below that level, and no one raised their hand. And I asked, how many are operating at that level, or would like to operate at, and some raised their hand. Most would rather operate higher than a mid-level point of maintenance. On the other hand, when we started to talk about budget, there was a lot of discussion about where those numbers came from. So as you can see in this institution's example, we're not budgeted for where we'd like to operate, and that requires a lot of effort, and eventually it becomes unsustainable. That's good. So how do you do this? So let's go to the next slide. So it's really, really simple. You take this chart, and we're going to provide it electronically with in an Excel spreadsheet with this edition. There'll be electronic files that come along with each of the books this year. You just take and you stick a pin in the category where you think you'd first to set your goals, in the category where you think you'd like to operate, and then and you can decide that you want to operate all in level 2 or all in level 3. Most of us do. Some of us say we guarantee that we'll operate in 3, and we strive to operate in 2. Some may guarantee they operate in 2 and strive for 1. Rarely do you see a goal that is in reactive maintenance. But then where do you stand? I mean, how do you track your progress? In this case, we're tracking 2 campuses, and I wanted to show the equations basically of how that comes about. So you just take a pin up, give me just a second. You take a pin and you stick it in each of those attributes, and you connect the dots. And from the previous slide, you'll see that sort of gives you an overview of where your campus stands. And then we'll go to the next slide, and we'll talk a little bit about the calculations. So you have 13 attributes. Service levels are 1 is the highest, a 5 is the lowest. It's sort of counterintuitive, but it's how the tradition has been set for many years, and we decided that we're going to keep it that way. For multiple campuses, you need to weight it by area. So the next click. So for this example, 13 values of each campus. So you sum them up, all of the sums of bunches of 2s and bunches of 3s, a couple of 4s, and and you divide by 13. The one campus is operating at about a 2.1 service level. The other campus is operating at about a 3.03. You weight it by gross square footage, and the combined campus is running at about a 2.68 service level. If there's anybody has any questions on that, please put them in the chat box. So it's a great tool to just quantify subjectivity and show direction over time. It's easy to roll that out with your boss, and when you're setting those goals initially, you want to get that signed off as high as you can. Everybody should have an understanding of where you're operating and what you're budgeted for, because most people would say they want to operate at the highest level, but they don't want to to pay for that, and there's a cost to doing that, and you either pay it as you're going, or you end up with a larger deferred maintenance, which eventually catches up with you. All right.
So one of the things that folks sometimes struggle with, and we provided it in several different levels of detail, but I'll present the lowest level of detail right here, and that is calculating your staffing requirements. And this is a scenario from a residential public institution that I'm very familiar with. And let's say they wanted to operate at a service level of 2, recognizing that their buildings had an average age of 29 years out of a typical 50-year life. and that the building conditions resulted in a facility condition index of 20 or 20%. So they had a fair amount of what would be called deferred maintenance. The staffing tables are organized, again, along the 5 levels. And at the simplest level, we just break down classroom buildings, laboratory buildings, office administration, and then the residential buildings. So the service level 2 is highlighted, and you can see for 1 million square feet, 12 people are required to maintain 1 million square feet of classroom buildings. 21 people are recommended to maintain 1 million square feet of laboratory facilities, 16 people for 1 million square feet of office or administration facilities, and 14 for residential. Applying all of the arithmetic as shown below, we get an estimate of 28.8 people required to maintain those facilities. But looking back up at the top, you'll see that I've identified a number of buildings and the building age, as well as some deferred maintenance. And then we all know that having different buildings and older buildings and buildings that have some deferred maintenance adds some things to our workload. So we have a couple adjustment factors for things like the average age of the building or the conditions. And instead of being a little or not quite 29 people, why we have to add a couple more people to deal with some of the problems associated with that poor condition of our facility. Are those numbers enough? Maybe, maybe not. But it's somewhat challenging to recognize that or say that we're going to solve all of our deferred maintenance with our staff employees. We may just have those employees responding to a few more emergencies, which we have to handle. Other things that we're going to be addressing in the guidelines are some chapters or a chapter on improved staff development, hiring methods, and training. We've got a number of position descriptions which may be helpful for your department. We still address issues of auxiliaries and K-12 schools, which are different from most higher ed institutions. We have some examples on contracting or partnerships. We don't want to assume that you can maintain absolutely everything on your campus, but neither are we assuming that you're going to contract out everything. Although it is possible that some institutions will want to use the manual to identify what a contractor may be planning on delivering for them. And the manual is very helpful in identifying what you may need from your contractor and identifying requirements or expectations for your contractor. We're also going to be looking at implementation of a preventive maintenance program. Many of us believe, it hasn't been completely proved yet, but many of us believe that preventive maintenance allows us to do an awful lot more with the same number of people, or to do the same level of work with a smaller number of people. And so it's difficult to make the change from reactive maintenance to preventive maintenance. And so we spend a fair amount of time talking about different case studies of how to step through everything that's required to move your organization from a reactive maintenance style to a preventive maintenance style, and improve your customer service and satisfaction over time. We're spending a fair amount of time also talking about implementation of a computerized maintenance management system or integrated work management system, whatever you want to call it, talking about the benefits of it, and talking about some things that you should insist on if you are implementing a computerized maintenance management system, of interfacing with the university's enterprise system and other systems so that you can reduce your overhead staff and not have to rekey data, among other things. We are focusing in on customer service, not just what you do and what you ask up front, but how to address the feedback circle and how to respond to your customers. And of course, we're looking at different compliance issues and sustainability. Compliance is getting to be a bigger problem for us all of the time. Seems to be more rules and regulations appearing on the horizon every day. As mentioned, we're looking at our staffing, and we're providing information about career ladders and how to move maybe some talented people in low-skilled areas and training them up and getting them into higher skilled areas because they're dedicated and they're reliable employees. You want to have them on your in your organization rather than having only technical people. We're trying to make sure that everything is easy to reference and accessible and adaptable for your organization. That's kind of a challenge, but you'll be seeing an expanded appendix that provides some easy references for you. And still recognizing that we can't be everything for everyone, but hopefully we're giving you enough background so that you can be successful in your position. One of the new things that we're featuring is a chapter on reliability. So to go beyond preventive maintenance, we're looking at reliability-focused maintenance. How reliable are the systems? How do you validate that they're reliable? How do you know what's going on? And then how do you know when, based on reliability reports, that you have to go out and perform some maintenance on a system? So there's a step-by-step guide that will help you convert from your existing maintenance approach to a reliability-based maintenance. It identifies the kind of team that you need to make initial estimates of what you should be paying attention to, as well as development goals. And then there's just the standard things, I call them standard, of identifying critical success factors, setting your baseline for improvement, making sure everybody knows what's happening as you convert from either reactive maintenance or preventive maintenance to reliability maintenance, and how you frequently measure your results, identify needs for improvement, and then make those improvements. We're also spending time looking at the APPA FPI and how the maintenance guidelines tie in with the APPA FPI, either to encourage you to take advantage of the FPI and participate in that annual survey, or maybe to apply the FPI to your organization. Lastly, with the FPI, something that I presented at the Denver conference is to consider a micro FPI. That is, what data do you need to know everything that's important about a single building, and how do you isolate that building and make improvements on service deliveries?
So this is a couple of dials from the current FPI, and the FPI is just like everything else in APPA is under improvement. So the new survey will ask the questions in a different way, and we'll actually have better graphics coming out of Tableau. But for the purpose of this presentation, we're using the output of the current FPI. And I just wanted to show you two dials. So the first dial on the left is an illustration of service levels. So there was 198 universities responded. This particular university with the red dial is running at about a 2. It's self-report type of thing. And the average medium university is running around 2.84. Earlier in the presentation, you saw some calculations where the the university that the one campus was running at about a 2.08, but when you report in whole numbers. On the next slide, in the next dial over, you can see where the average gross square foot per technician is running at about 76,240 gross square feet. This particular institution was running at about 74,620. There's about a standard deviation of 30 square feet, and that's not, that's not 30,000 square feet. So that's not a small standard deviation. There's people that are running all the way up at 100,000 square feet a technician and all the way down to 46. So let's go to the next slide and see how that works out. So that gives you a snapshot of where you are that year. But if you participate in the FBI and you do these things over time, you can start to benchmark against yourselves. So this is a slide showing Philadelphia University, which is now part of the Jefferson University, over time. So back in 2014, the staffing was a little over 80,000 square feet a technician. And then you can see in 16, it really got sparse. And then we've started to normalize again. So the 2018 mean for gross square foot is about 76,240. The calculated requirement is about 66,000 for this campus, and it's running just a little bit under the mean, and we're accomplishing a little more than what the calculation would lead you to need. And these are tools that you can use at your institution to know whether you're in the range or not. The important thing, I think, is to try to be within that standard deviation and show improvement amongst yourself. Go ahead.
Also, APPA has developed a total cost of ownership model, and I'm not going to go into all the details of TCO, but we will be talking in the new manual about how you provide basic building data for a TCO application, how you apply the total cost of ownership concept to building maintenance, how the maintenance that you deliver on a daily basis influences the overall building planning and design for maybe new construction or for renovations, and to give you the tools to implement TCO for renovation and rehabilitation projects, so you can better describe to your boss and to others how to, why you need to spend some money to replace something, where the benefits are, how you explain to your own staff how to make better operating and maintenance decisions, maybe how to make presentations or critique the work of outside designers on the information they should be providing to you, or maybe the actions they should be taking to make your facility better so that it can be sustained, not just from an environmental sustainability perspective, but from a lower total life cycle cost that you're always paying attention to, because maintaining facilities are expensive. In addition, we're going to be looking at incorporating elements of the International Standards Organization Standard 41001, which is the management system standard for facility management. We'll look at how to create a management system standard. There's also a separate standard on strategy for sourcing of services. So whether you're going to source from inside your organization or contract, and what the decisions are. We'll look at the development of an overall facility management strategy, and another standard that looks at improving facility outcomes. So all of those are separated out in 4 standards that have been developed by committees across the world 41001 is very similar to ISO 9001, which some of you may be familiar with, but it's focused on facilities. And really all it is a simple plan, do, check, act cycle, where planning is the big part of that system. Your operations and maintenance is part of the do. You have some kind of evaluation that you perform periodically, the check. And then the act cycle is simply, what are you going to do when you see that you have a gap? And how do you make improvements? Strategic sourcing is, again, a standard concept that was introduced by APPA years ago called the make-buy decision. Are you going to make something? Are you going to have your own forces provide a service, or are you going to buy it? Facility management strategy starts to look at the overall organization, the institution that you work for. What are their goals? And then how does a facility management organization support your goals or support the institution's goals? And then how do you influence outcomes that your institution wants through 41015? It identifies ways to close the gaps and to change the way services are delivered to improve the overall value, not just of the institution, but your organization and the services that you provide every day to your organization. There's an awful lot of new material in this guideline, and we think it will be beneficial for all APPA members. So with that, Billy, we have time, I think, for you to ask us some questions that have come in from the audience.
I'll bring those right up here. Okay. Our first question is, how did you come up with the staffing levels for each type of building and the service level?
There are essentially three ways that we did the work. And the first two are pretty similar. What we did was we got back in when the standard was first put together, or the guideline, I should say, was first put together in the late 90s. We looked at several volunteer institutions, estimated or looked at their staffing that they had in a number of different areas, looked at their mix of buildings, and then with the help of Phil Ware from RS Means, who had a great deal of expertise in modeling and estimating, developed the basic standards that you see for classrooms, laboratories, office administration, and residential. Those are rough numbers. They're not supposed to be accurate, spot on, but they are an easy way of coming up with a good idea of what you have to spend in the way of personnel. We have a separate chapter developed by Matt Adams that looks at a zero-based buildup of your staffing needs. And again, that standard was based on counting virtually everything in your organization. How many windows have you got? How many 1 horsepower pumps do you have? How many electrical transformers have you got? And then using some data that was developed by a combination of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and the Naval Facilities Operations, looking at standards for maintenance of facilities to keep your facilities in like new condition. Those standards also included recommendations on replacing building components. So you can look at your facility from a rough estimate based on averages, or you can look at your facility in a great level of detail to come up with the staffing. There's close correlation between the zero-based buildup and the general staffing levels identified in the simple tables, but that's how they were developed, and we haven't found any better way of doing it yet. If you have a suggestion on a better way of doing it, let us know.
So Ted, I just want to mention that as we illustrated in the presentation, you know, the actual gut check is what's happening out in the trades and where they stand, and that we've continued to validate those numbers, as you saw, where the ranges fell, were, you know, right about in the middle of where they needed to be. So that, you know, that's the third way of doing this, is to look at where you are compared to your cohorts, and that was the chapter that was pulled together with real data or most recent data from going over, you know, over about somewhere between 300 and 600 institutions.
Right. So what you're really saying is that we can look at it from a couple perspectives, and one is estimates based on standards that have been developed maybe in the laboratory, and then look at your campus as a laboratory and what are the results that you're seeing on your campus. And it's all there in the guidelines for you to use.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Have you addressed how to set the stage to move from preventive maintenance to predictive reliability-centered maintenance?
Yes, there's a separate chapter written by one of Tom's colleagues at Jefferson.
Yeah, Ed Sampi and Tom Coombs put that together to look at converting from a reactive-based to reliability-based and predictive-based maintenance. But I think you can also look across when you're talking about moving from crisis or reactive all the way to show place or comprehensive stewardship. If you look at the table of service levels, the descriptors in there will let you know what you should be doing to hit those higher levels. So it's sort of, maybe I'm answering the question in two ways, or maybe I'm answering two different questions. So there's a very detailed chapter that Tom and Ed put together. It breaks it down in several levels, and it has its own attributes. And you work across that table in that particular chapter to pick up the different tasks that you would be doing to assure your institution's running well, from mainly a reliability standpoint. But then moving through the service levels, there's more attributes than just reliability.
Okay, thank you. Will the new edition address diversity in recruitment?
Diversity in recruitment is often a challenge for each individual campus, and we are agnostic to diversity requirements. We're focused mostly on technical issues.
Okay, thank you. When will the new edition be available?
Boy, that's a question. So we're in the final writing and editorial stages right now. I think it should be out probably second or third quarter of 2020. Yeah, 2020. Yeah. Yeah, not 2000, but 2020. I knew the 20 was in there somewhere. But you know, we're pushing ourselves. These are volunteer authors, all of them. They're doing it for the good of the profession, and everyone has their own jobs to do as well. So it takes about 5 rewrites of a chapter to get it to where it's in publishable form. We're on about the 4th version of that now in most of the manuals, and we do want to put them out as a trilogy. You know, one of the manuals is a little more advanced than the last one. So, but that time frame, mid to late next year.
Okay. Have you addressed the economics, or ROI, of adequately funding maintenance activities to demonstrate the cost of not having an adequate maintenance program? Pay me now or pay me more later?
we're attempting to do that utilizing APPA's TCO because it's the best tool that we've identified that's available that really says what it's going to cost to do work now and what the future benefit is through savings resulting from good maintenance.
Yeah, when you look at that chapter and the diagrams in there, there's points across the building's life where you need to reinvest, and that's what that illustrates. And the outcome of not investing at that point is that your maintenance cost accelerates, and that's also illustrated.
Thank you. And we had someone asked to please consider differentiating between CMMS and IWMS.
The difference between CMMS and integrated work management systems?
Yes.
You know, I look at them as being the same. I'm sure that a vendor would be deeply insulted by me saying that. I would go to get a clear understanding, I would go to a company like TMA, AssetWorks, and so on, Maximo. Those are some of the big ones in our industry, and ask them what the differences are, if any.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Will there be an online downloadable guideline with this next edition?
You know, that's been discussed, but I don't believe that it will be downloadable. This will come out in printed form initially, but I believe that there will be, with each of the books, there'll be downloadable tables and worksheets so that it's easier to go through the process, like for the figuring out your manpower loading and so forth. In the last edition, we did that for custodial, and that was much appreciated. We didn't have that for the other guidelines.
Thank you. Are the tech coverage recommendations broken down by trade?
The only way to do that successfully is to spend a fair amount of time doing a zero-based budget development because the data that we have available really is, you have to know exactly what components you have in a facility. It is virtually impossible for us to assume that all university buildings in the APPA family are of a particular category. Plus, we also have the challenge that some trades claim different areas in different parts of the country. And where years ago I fought the battle of having electricians or HVAC techs maintaining the building automation system, you may still have that battle to face. And so we have not broken it down by trades unless you take the effort of categorizing every single component that you have, or every major component you have on your campus.
And to clarify what Ted's saying there is, if you take the time to do that, there are tables that are going to be provided. It's called the building block data. It's in one of the chapters about how to staff. And I'm just looking at the manual right now, and there's about a dozen different trades that are broken out. It doesn't go into every trade, but your general ones: carpenters, electricians, HVAC, plumbers, masons. They're broken out that way. That's very intricate to get to that level. Very intricate.
You know, the alternate approach would be to say, okay, I assume that I needed this many electricians, this many plumbers, this many HVAC techs, and it seems as though from regular measurements, once a year, that we're really falling behind on our HVAC maintenance. And so next opportunity I have with a vacant position, I'm going to take it away from one of the other trades and I'm going to apply it to the HVAC techs because they're not keeping up. And you can do that without the guidelines if you just think about how you organize your work.
Okay. Does the new version look at strategy to address outliers on the levels of service documents on what those specific outliers mean when looking at the organization?
Question.
If you're talking about gaps or insufficient customer service, or maybe your facility management leaders have expressed some concerns about service delivery, we're talking about the process of plan, do, check, act, and how do you recognize you have a deficiency, and what do you need to do to close that deficiency. A lot of those things are still controlled locally, and you have to make the decision that you're going to have a responsive organization to your campus's needs.
Thank you. Is there credit in staffing levels for zone-based versus central maintenance structure? Also, is there credit for technicians using web-enabled devices to manage their workloads?
Great question, and it's something that I've been pondering how we will incorporate. You're absolutely right. If you have a large campus and you have a central operation, you're probably paying some kind of penalty in transportation costs and moving around the campus that where you would receive a significant benefit by having zone maintenance. We haven't yet quantified that. If we can get it quantified in time for this publication, it'll be included.
Yeah, Matt has a little bit of that in the chapter that he's doing, and I think we spend probably more time about that on the custodial guideline, where that is quite a divide or a methodology change is coming about, going to like team cleaning in zone areas. Their tables will be more explicit in that regard.
Okay. And just to let everybody know, we will be having a webinar on the grounds and custodial guidelines in December. So take a look at our webinar page and you can sign up for those now. We have time for a couple more questions. Could you spend a few minutes to describe the maintenance management plan template, such as the table of contents section, etc., you referred to earlier?
I'll do the best I can. So the maintenance management system is divided into 7 basic chapters when you look at the ISO guidelines or requirements for facility management maintenance standards. Essentially, it's what is the strategy of the organization that you're serving, your university or college? What's the strategy of your facility management organization? What's your plan to address those needs? How are you going to measure your service as you address those basic needs? That creates your plan. And then there are separate chapters for how are you going to operate, how are you going to behave through daily decisions, how will you measure and respond to gaps in your service, how will you identify those gaps? That's the check. And then finally, who are you going to bring together and identify ways of closing the gap? So that's the act phase. And then you repeat that all over again, plan, do, check, act on a regular basis. We'll describe those at a high level, going into the details of exactly how you put your maintenance management plan together may end up requiring that you get the ISO 41001 book. It just depends.
Thank you. Have you addressed how to objectively measure the training gap for maintenance techs, considering the very sophisticated systems installed in new buildings? Adequately trained techs are hard to find.
Yeah, adequately trained techs are hard to find, particularly with the amount of money that colleges and universities allow us to spend on our personnel. We do not get into the individual evaluation. We tell you how to create an evaluation template, but how to actually evaluate an employee, that's really going to depend on your organization and coordinating with your human resources department.
And some of that depends sort of about where you are in the country, and for example, and that's part of what Jim Jackson gets into a little bit with career ladders and so forth. A lot of campuses are finding that they need to develop their own staffs. You know, that they can't rely on outside expertise to come in, where other campuses that might be in the middle of a city or something can really streamline their staffs and pull expertise in as they need them. It's not a training manual for you know, to get your trades up to speed.
Okay, we have time for one more question, and if we have additional questions, and if we run out of time, the questions will be sent to the presenters and they will reach out to you directly with an answer. So our last question is, when comparing PM to CM, in which area will you allocate the corrective action done to prevent major failures? They are corrective, but in reality, not fully reactive.
You're getting down to some of the nitty-gritty details of the definition of different service delivery, if I'm not mistaken. To a great extent, it's in the eye of the beholder, but if you are able to plan work in advance, you know that it's following a schedule, that is preventive maintenance. If you are measuring the condition of the components and you're planning your work based on degradation of the operating conditions, that's reliability, more or predictive focused maintenance. But if you're receiving a call that says that you have a problem with something, but you have the opportunity to plan that work, that's still corrective or reactive, and that's generally where we're falling.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, one quick question is, when will the custodial book be updated, and what is your status on that?
It'll all be published at the same time. It's under development right now. The trilogy will come out as a set, just like it always has the last two times. So we're looking at the second or third quarter of 2020.
Okay. We have time for, I don't know if you can answer this quickly. 1 per 66,000 square foot, is that the average? What would be the numbers? What would the numbers be for a campus with a lot of older buildings?
Okay, so if you have a lot of older buildings, there's a separate factor that's identified for the average age of the building. But there's also a factor that was listed for deferred maintenance. And then there are some other factors that address the overall size of the campus and the the mission of the campus.
Yeah. You've got to get into the math. There isn't really, we try to stay away from saying the average square foot for a technician is X. We see that come about in the FBI that, you know, when you migrate all of these things together, you know, it's like a big stew, you know, it comes out, you're able to come out with a number, but in reality, you've got a staff for your particular campus needs.
Okay, we're at the top of the hour. I'd like to thank everybody who took time out of their busy schedules to join our webinar today. I'd like to thank Tom and Ted for a very informative webinar. Thank you very much, and we look forward to seeing you on our next webinar, which will be on the 24th on smart buildings. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful day.